Welcome to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Welcome to another episode of the show. Today we have a very, very special guest, and we're going to be talking to those of you who look for work. So one of the things about looking for work is that you want to stand out, and often you may not have a dense resume or the work experience that makes you stand out. So how do you do that? And we're going to call that branding, your personal branding. We're going to talk with a couple of amazing experts about how do you create yourself in a brand. Now, I've been reading about this for a while, and sometimes I think it's a little obnoxious to think that everyone is going to create this huge brand and spend tons of money. But that's not what we're going to do. We're going to give you some really practical, simple things that create the sense that you have a brand. And we'll talk to our experts. So I want to introduce our guests today. I've got two really cool people. So with me is Ed Barrientos, and he is local here to Arlington. He's the CEO of Brazen Technologies, which is a high-growth technology company that has developed software to help companies recruit and hire, as well as assist associations in connecting with their members using text. So texting, so people text to each other, that's what people are doing now. Prior to Brazen, Ed was the CEO of Arc Second, where he led them to a successful exit. Ed is a well-known serial entrepreneur and angel investor, and is an entrepreneur in residence at the Dingman Center for Entrepreneurship here at the University of Maryland. Ed is on the national faculty of the National Science Foundation's Innovation Corps and is on the board of advisors of the Penn State World Campus. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you.
Are you an alumni of Penn?
I am not. I have two sons at Penn State.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And also on the show, I've got probably one of the most, there's a good word. I didn't want to say like flamboyant, but one of the most pungent speakers. That's not even the right word.
No.
But
notorious, maybe.
Notorious? I don't know. There isn't an adjective to describe my guest, Matt Charney, but he is an awesome guy. Matt is the executive editor and head of content at Recruiting Daily, whose website is the world's largest destination for recruiting and talent acquisition news, views, and industry insight. Matt has held leadership roles at companies such as Warner Brothers, the Walt Disney Company, and Monster. Matt currently serves on the board for high-growth companies in the HR technology space. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Lorne.
Matt, help me out. What would be a great adjective to describe? Because you're different than like most other folks on the planet.
Well, there you go. I guess I succeeded at the brand. I think that the adjective that would describe me is probably controversial.
Controversial. There you go. So we're going to talk about this branding thing and give our listeners some really practical tips, little things, little tiny micro moves. We could talk about some big moves later, but some little things. So first, let's talk about what does branding mean? Ed, what does branding mean?
Well, I think if you think about branding and sort of from where the term typically gets used often in consumer products, it's how you envision all the qualities, all the backstories of something. It could be a computer, it could be an Apple computer, it could be anything, right? It's the perception that it is creating, consciously or not, for others to see. That is branding, and we've typically associated brands with inanimate objects and inanimate things like companies and products. Today, we think of it as your own personal brand. That's relatively new. Maybe 10 years ago, actually, one of the founders of our company, Penelope Trunk, was equally controversial as Matt, probably, and began talking about that concept. Today, because we are all online in one form or another, your brand, whether you know it or not, is working for or against you.
Right. So, Matt, I want to hear from you for a second, but just so I get what you're saying, the brand is what people think of whatever it is. It's just their perception of whatever it is.
I think so.
What do you think about that, Matt?
Well, I think Penelope is a great example of somebody who's done little things to build a brand. Mainly, I believe, about a decade ago, she live tweeted her miscarriage, which made me a fan forever. But that said, I think that, being in Fort Worth, brand's actually something that you stick on a cow. But when it comes to, the concept of personal brand, I think my favorite definition is what people say about you when you're not in the room, right? So essentially, brand is all of the collective sentiment, both, explicit and implicit, that goes into basically a package. And the one thing I will say about brand, again, when we're talking about controversial or anything like that, the most valuable brand, if you look at it from a marketing perspective in the world, is actually Marlboro. So Marlboro cigarettes are the most popular brand in the world. I would go ahead and say that's one that most people wouldn't have ethical values that they share, but for some reason they have that amount of equity. So I think that, on a consumer marketing side, it's just a good example of the fact that not everyone has to like your brand to buy it.
Right. So, but again, the brand thing, we're talking about people who are looking for jobs, so obviously, I've known you for a few years, Matt, and other than all of your backstory, I see you as, and I think controversial is the right way, but, you're, rambunctious, you're energetic, you're opinionated, and that isn't all of who you are, but it's how I, in the dynamic of our relationship, is how I perceive you.
Right. Well,
and you didn't do a whole. Now, what did you? I'm sorry. What?
I said I do have a confession to make on that, which is to say that when I think of like how I have consciously kind of built my brand, it's been under the context of being a professional wrestling fan, right? And I will admit that I do love professional wrestling because it's basically camp drama. But there are heels and there are heroes, and everyone wants to be a hero. And I saw, most people on the market doing that, and I decided, like Hollywood Hulk Hogan, that there was probably a pretty good positioning in being a heel. So, in terms of my personal narrative and storyline, I've definitely built it on professional wrestling terms.
So, just so folks who are listening, the hero is obviously, the Hulk Hogan of the world. The heel is the person who is kind of the villain. Right, and
correct.
Any good narrative
did switch from hero to villain at one point in his career.
Okay, so thank you for that good wrestling history. But for the person who's looking for a job, you're a recruiting expert, Ed. This whole war on talent and how to find people. How does somebody create their own brand? I mean, they're not going to be speaking publicly necessarily. What do they do?
Well, if I may, I think one of the simplest, lowest hanging fruits, if you will, in the whole area of branding is the fact that many people, and I'm a Gen Xer, and I'm shocked by how many Gen Xers don't realize the brand that they are actually sort of putting out there, right? They really don't know. They don't realize that the whole world uses LinkedIn and looks you up before a meeting. It's not even for career issues. It's really to see who is this person. I can't tell you how many people I know that are incredibly bright, incredibly talented. You go to their LinkedIn profile. There's no picture. There's very little of anything there. They have 10 connections. That immediately says something to you.
To what?
Right?
What does it say to you?
It says this person is not up to date, right? It does.
And they don't care.
And they don't care. They really don't care.
Yeah.
Now,
and they may care, but they just didn't do this stuff.
Correct.
And so that affects their brand.
And there is a certain amount of emotion that comes with doing anything with social media, especially if you're a Gen Xer or a Boomer. Like every generation, there's a sense of ridicule for what the new generation is bringing out there. When social media came, in let's say it's not that old.
I would
6, 7,
never
8
say
years ago.
that I would ridicule a millennial. Wink,
right,
wink.
right. And that's what happened, right? Yeah. There was this instant knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I don't need that nonsense. I don't need to be on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. That's for young, trendy people. And the problem is, I remember in, the boomers saying that to us about having a mobile phone or even email, right? It's a natural reaction every generation has. Unfortunately, today, that position that you may have is now visible to everybody.
Right. So I think the first thing people need to know is that it's important to stay current with what's going on in the world.
Absolutely. 100%.
So you have to have a LinkedIn profile.
Yes.
You have to. And you have to have a picture on it. Like if you're not,
Absolutely.
then you're not current. If you're not current, then the message you're sending is I'm not current. I don't care.
Correct.
And it's not going to help you. So what else can we do, Matt? I mean, what are some of the other things? I know we're going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn, and we'll talk about maybe some of the outlets for what we call brand.
Yeah.
But what would you say about kind of the fundamentals of what someone does to create their brand, Matt?
Well, I mean, I think that I would challenge the whole world uses LinkedIn, given the fact it's not in China and Russia, right? So also, you look at
the whole Western world.
Right.
Can we be okay with the Western world?
Yes.
Since we're broadcasting in English, the English-speaking world.
Right. Which honestly, it's become ubiquitous. But I do think that the reason why is actually because if you look at their largest source of traffic, it's what we call vanity searches, which is like people looking up other people on Google, right? And so I think that when you look at your personal brand, particularly what your brand says about you online, Google is actually the most important thing to look at, right? So a couple of things that I would say people actually miss beyond LinkedIn, and I can tell you as well that in certain roles, particularly in information security, and certainly law is another one, people are discouraged from maintaining active LinkedIn profiles, putting their headshots up, and also a lot of companies forbid their employees from doing it, right, due to various non-disclosures. So I wouldn't say it's necessary. It is necessary to have a brand online. Two ways to do that are, to me, the easiest are Twitter. And I know that that's that of all networks, because it's not necessarily intuitive, which anyone trying to put a valuation on that can tell you, is that it integrates within LinkedIn, within Google. So if I'm typing your name and looking up search results, actually the first thing that's going to show up is an embedded tweet stream. So I think maintaining that is really, really important. And the second I would say,
hang on, before we get into some of the mechanisms of managing our branding, let's talk a little bit more about the fundamental backstory, right? So branding is what people think of you, right? We're kind of agreed upon that. And what they think of you, like you said, when you're not in the room, what they think of you or what they say about you to other people. How do I know what people are saying about me if I'm not there?
I would start by Googling yourself and seeing what the internet says about you.
But I may go hey, that looks good, right? I love myself. I'm great. But how would I actually know? Is there a way to assess my personal brand? Well, I'll give my assertion is that I would have my engineer, Afotey, and my production assistant, Alex, and maybe a few of my friends Google me and say, what do you think about me? Because they'll tell me the truth. Right, Afotey? Yes, sir. Yeah, like maybe he won't. He's looking at not. But have people actually assess my brand. That would be a great company. A company that assesses your brand and gives you some honest feedback.
Well, I think it starts, and I'll agree with Matt on that. I think it starts with awareness, right? What is? I mean, the thing about Google is that it knows so much, and it's drawing in from so many different places that you probably, if you haven't Googled yourself and don't Google yourself relatively frequently, you may not know what's out there, what people are finding.
Right. So if you Google yourself,
right,
put your name in quotes. I know I'm like the only Lorne Epstein, so I come up when I Google myself, which I've done. What about people who are like John Smith?
Yeah, that's a challenge. I mean, I will tell you, because I know that's a challenge because I've Googled people like that, and you just cannot find anything that you can be sure it's about this individual. I mean, that I don't know if Matt has any other hacks around that, but it's really hard, right? Even on LinkedIn, if I'm looking for someone, I'm going to have a conversation with this customer. I'm going to have a conversation with a banker, whoever. That's the first thing I do is I want to know who I'm talking to. So I may not be able to find. I mean, it's really hard. It's not that easy to find.
So me as a candidate, I guess the first thing I'd want to do is ask myself some questions about, ask, what do people think about me on, in real life? And maybe what do people think about me on the internet?
Right.
And maybe what do people think about me on these different modalities like LinkedIn and then maybe is there some way to score myself to get a sense of what they think of me? I mean, what would be the dimensions of how someone looks at me?
Well, I think that's a good question. I don't know if there are any today. I mean, that it gives me an idea for a business. But I will say one other thing I just want to bring in the fact that you do appear on LinkedIn, you probably, if you have Facebook, you will appear on Facebook and Google, like Matt said. Most people today have public Facebook accounts, or most of what they do online is public. And, that is also visible. If I don't have anything else to go on, I will look at your Facebook profile. I do. And, that whether it's your Twitter, Facebook, anything is available. If it's public, you do have to be aware that whatever it is that you're writing in Facebook and whatever it is you're doing is going to be visible. It is part of your brand, whether you like it or not. Your ability to control that and form it is tough. Unless you're actively doing it, people are going to draw what they're going to draw from what you post on Facebook, what you post on Twitter.
Sees things differently. Like Matt was saying about this woman who tweeted about her miscarriage.
Right.
Matt was like, I'm in love with that woman.
Right.
Other people might be like, oh, that's a complete turnoff.
Right.
Right. So you have to decide just what is your brand going to be. I just Googled this, but there's a site called selfbrand.com. I'm sure if you Google what is my brand, there's probably some resources to help you figure out what questions you should be asking to decide what your brand is.
Well, there were, if you look back 5 years ago, when all this was really, really, in a frenzy, there were sites that actually would rate the power of your brand and your social media presence. I forgot. It started with a K. I can't remember.
Clout would be one.
Yes, Clout.
Oh yeah,
Clout.
Klout.
I believe so.
Yeah,
and there were, because for a while it's died down tremendously now. For a while people believe that was everything.
I still get Clout emails once in a while.
Yeah, but like everything, it's trendy. Pokemon Go was incredible. Everyone thought this is it, right? Everything is trendy, and it starts to lose favor. And that's why I say, looking at it from a practical perspective, from the majority of people, a lot of the things that they can do on the branding side is just make sure they're not, oblivious to it all.
So something like Clout has their own kind of scoring system, which is fine. But I think what we're getting at is I've got to decide, how do I want to present myself, right? And I imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, that people have a sense of me, right? They listen to the show and they probably think what they think of me, and that's fine. I don't know if I really care, because I'm not gonna change myself. I'm not gonna do anything to manage it, because I feel like I've fully formed as an adult. I have no desire to, other than to be what I perceive to be honest and truthful and have great content. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if that's how people think of the show. They may listen to the show and go like, oh, that's a load of horse.
Well, but it depends on what your goal is, right? If starting off from the premise of the discussion, if your goal is to find employers and find the best, jobs that you want, you can't ignore your brand.
So then maybe
you can't ignore how you're being,
that's
perceived.
a good point. So maybe then what we're trying to do is just put yourself out there in your most truthful way, knowing that if I'm going to hire you, I want to know who you really are at some level, or at least some sense of you, right? Matt, what do you think about that?
I mean, I absolutely agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, the biggest mistake I think people make when they're building a brand is that they do it consciously. And so you talk, like, if you Google how to build your brand, whatever, you're going to see a lot of different articles about it. And to me, those are often disingenuous, in the sense that if you actually, it's fascinating, the people who are the biggest experts on personal branding, I'm actually looking at a list right now on Clout, which, by the way, all that's measuring is quote, influence, which is the repetition of keywords among a certain topic coupled with engagement on Twitter. So, like, that doesn't really actually tell me anything about how people see me. It only tells me how many people engage with me, right? So the one thing I'll say is that if you look at the experts on personal branding, fascinatingly enough, I'm looking at the top 5 now. None of them have work experience for the last 15 years. So, it's an interesting paradigm there. But I think you hit the nail on the head is when you care and try to consciously build a personal brand, you get into stuff like, marketing whisperer, or accounting guru, or some of those other words that
like ninja
actually say I'm a
hacker.
I'm kind of a douche, for lack of a better word there. And I think that
can they say that on air? Afotey? That word? That's okay. Afotey says that's okay. Keep going. You're good.
Yeah, I think the FCC says I'm okay on that one. But all that is to say, I think that if you are yourself, then you are creating a commodity that companies want, ostensibly, because there are going to be a lot of, social media ninjas or brand gurus or experts or my favorite best-selling author, which, there are a whole lot of best-selling authors out there. Statistically, I would say further from the norm. But you just kind of go down the list, and at the end of the day, there's always going to be somebody else who can make these sweeping claims and packages. But the one thing that can never be replaced, and, there's only one of, if you look at commodity and scarcity, it's you. And
Right.
so if you are yourself at all points of time, if you are consistent, and if you say what you believe, then you are not building a brand. You are just amplifying yourself. And I can tell you from experience that people who are attracted to that will reach out and you'll build some meaningful relationships. People who aren't generally won't engage, but either way, you're kind of self-selecting already. And the people who you're going to click with anyway are the people who you're going to want to work with and work for. And the people who, you're not going to, who don't jive with your authentic self, are people who you probably, even if you got a job, it wouldn't last or you'd be miserable. So I think that when I always get feedback, the first thing people generally say is, you say what I wish I could. And then I ask why they don't, and they say, I can get in trouble. And I think if you stop worrying about risk and start thinking just more about how do I consistently be me, then you're golden.
So we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein, here on 96.7 FM. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. Thanks for listening to our show. If you're interested in getting on the show, you can give me a call at 240-876-0276 or follow us on Facebook at You're Hired. And you can join my meetup where we teach interview skills at Interview Skills to Get the Job at meetup.com. Again, I'm your host, Lorne Epstein. You're listening to You're Hired on 96.7 FM, Arlington, Virginia. Welcome back to the show. With me today, I have my guest, Ed Barrientos, the CEO of Brazen Technologies, and Matt Charney, who's the executive editor of Recruiting Daily. We're talking about branding yourself. And Matt, what you just said before we left was excellent. And I want to counterpoint it with that we're in D.C. A lot of folks have multiple personalities, right? I mean, I think one of the things I've gotten as feedback is I'm always the same everywhere, which has not always worked out. I'm this Brooklyn guy, and I'm like that wherever I go, and I don't know how to turn it off or turn it on. But I know there are people out there who have their work personality and their home personality and their friend personality, right? And that's just how they are, and they're successful in that way. How do we reconcile all this?
I think that's an interesting point, and kind of to counter a little bit what Matt is saying. I agree. You have to be authentic. You can't be lying about who you are, and there's only so much you can do in terms of guiding or managing your brand. But even authenticity becomes a fad, right? When people overreach, play that, then everybody, again, you get the same kind of comments that Matt was making about the ninja, but now it's, I'm such a creative, unique individual. I'm this, that, and the other. I'm authentic. I mean, I'm a cynic, and I come from a generation of cynics. So the first thing is, oh my God, I'm rolling my eyes. Even with Penelope Trunk, who I love because I worked with her very closely and is also a Gen Xer, I would roll my eyes because at some point it just seems fake, right?
Yeah.
Authenticity itself can be fake. Now, I think to your point on, what happens if we all have multiple dimensions to us, right? I'm a primitive hiker. I love hiking. I could be outside all day long.
But are you different, though, Ed, in different places?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
If I'm looking for a
I'm
job,
not.
well, here's the point. If I'm in my professional place, and I am, I'm a CEO of a company, there are a whole range of skills that apply. There are a whole range of experiences that I've gathered over the many, many years that are important for me and are important for my peers, my employees, my investors to understand, and for me to make sure that they understand that I have these skills. Now, if I'm with my group of friends that go to Utah every summer and hike like crazy in the middle of the wilderness, then it's a whole different story. Those people are looking for my skill sets in being able to build a fire, being able to do whatever it is that I do. As a parent, I have a whole range of other sets of skills that I need, right? So, yeah, but I think we can't. I do think that at some point it gets.
That's great. So you have all these different styles, and Matt probably would agree that he has different sets of styles.
Sure.
So because we use all these different social media platforms, like I use Facebook for family and friends, and I put things on there that some people might find controversial. I don't let anybody on my Facebook page unless they're my friend.
Right.
But on LinkedIn, I control that message in a different way. Although I am kind of the same person, I don't want to share some of the things that I think might offend other people. Right? Or just like pictures of kids and things like that. I don't want that to be out there.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Matt? I mean, how do we manage? Because you're saying before that some things can be found on LinkedIn, on Facebook rather. What do we do?
Yeah. So to me, I think there's a difference in presentational style, certainly. But for instance, I think the fact that you go primitive hiking, that's awesome. That makes you a more interesting person than I sit in a startup incubator all day long and dispense advice to the founders, right? So, I mean, there are a lot of people who do that, but how many people can say that they also know how to start a fire in the wilderness? That's awesome. So that, to me, I'll give an example. I hired a director of foreign exchange, which is a pretty boring kind of corporate job at the Walt Disney Company. And it was one of the most applied for jobs ever, right? Because you essentially had a bunch of investment bankers and stuff trying to get this FX trading job in-house for a major company. The person we ended up hiring only got the interview because she put on her resume that in her side she's a certified belly dancing instructor, which when you're looking at a bunch of resumes from corporate finance people, that's going to stand out. And I think that just having a life that exists beyond work goes a really, really long way. Certainly don't overshare it and don't put your kids' pictures on LinkedIn, which has become the bane of my existence, by the way. But all that is to say, I think that what makes somebody an interesting person is the same question that I always ask in every interview, and I still do. I'll flip somebody's resume over and say, what's the most interesting thing about you that's not on your resume? And the worst people to work with are the ones who can't, in a professional setting, talk about anything beyond their job or what they do, yada, yada, yada. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're looking for a job, you're looking to talk to people who you're going to have to spend more time with as a rule than you do your own family. So if fundamentally you don't share anything other than, we both have the same professional interest and skill set, then that to me just makes you at worst a drone, and certainly makes you somebody that I don't necessarily want to have a beer with after work. And to your DC point, Lorne, that's the presidential test now, isn't it? Is this somebody I want to have a beer with? And if you're all business all the time in certain networks, the answer is going to be no, I think.
So if Ed started his LinkedIn page with saying, I can start a fire with one match, period, that might be kind of interesting.
And also awesome.
Yeah, I think
Right.
where I would agree is that, when you're hiring someone, you are looking, at some depth, some multidimensionality, right? For me, that is just as Matt described it. If I have somebody in an interview and I ask that question, I would also be very disappointed if they can't give me some color to their lives. The challenge is, especially as you get older, and again, if you're a mid-career professional versus somebody right out of school, you're going to have a lot of stuff that you can throw in there. I mean, literally, you can't fit it on LinkedIn, right? You have a ton of stuff that you can fit in there. We come right back to the whole issue of managing how you want to be presented out there, right? Because if I decided, well, I'm going to throw everything in there and let those people that think that fire starting is cool, or they think this, that, or the other is cool, I mean, I'm creating a mishmash of crap that doesn't really help me. Now, I do think that again, coming back to the management piece, there is a certain amount of management. You do have the control with the social networks that you're using. And to come back to your question about, let's say Facebook, and maybe this is unique to the startup community. For me, with most of the startups in the area, I'm connected with them on Facebook. Yeah. And I do share just about everything. But then that keeps in the back of my head always what I'm sharing. And sometimes it is controversial. I'm not shy about sharing some of my politics, which is risky, but I do. And, but I'm not going to do things, and I shouldn't anyway, for my family that's on there. I'm going to think twice before I just hit post. And I think that's part of the answer in my mind. You have to be always aware that now, unlike before, everyone sees what you're doing.
So really, just to kind of encapsulate what you guys are saying, is that I need to bone up on my storytelling skills because I'm telling a story about me.
Sure.
And even if you're just out of college, you're still telling a story, right? If you have a resume where you maybe had 2 or 3 summers where you worked at a fast food place, right? That's one story. But what if those 2 or 3 places were NASA or something kind of interesting, or maybe you did something that would be more kind of, and I think kind of sussing out what we're talking about is to see yourself as multidimensional. What else about you is interesting? What's the most interesting thing that you think you've done that other people ask somebody, like, here are all the things I've done. What's interesting? What should I put in to my resume? What should I put in on my LinkedIn page? Maybe what I should even write, like if you even write just one posting about somewhere that people would find about you, that is kind of like what we're saying. Is that right, Matt?
Yeah, I think certainly you're talking about differentiation being important. And I think that, in terms of, it's interesting that you keep coming back to Facebook. I would say that, as the token millennial in all these conversations, Facebook's actually the safest place to be yourself and share stuff that people aren't going to judge you professionally, because, as you said earlier, you have to, admit people into your network. And I'll tell you that certainly most college kids would never accept a friend request from somebody they don't know, and certainly they don't even think about Facebook for a large part, right? Demographically, he's quite old. But you can tightly control that. You cannot tightly control who can see your information on LinkedIn. And you certainly have no control over Twitter unless you protect your account, which kind of defeats the point. So I think, knowing privacy controls solves a lot of these issues if you have them.
All right, well, let's talk about the doing. Let's talk about some of the tactics. So, there's Facebook, there's LinkedIn, there's Monster, there's Google, there's Twitter. Let's just take, starting at the top, Google, right? So How does Google or any kind of search engine work? Like, fundamentally, you type something in and what happens?
Well, nobody actually knows the answer to that, which is to say, except for Larry Page, nobody knows how that algorithm works. But a lot of people have educated guesses that it's based off of where and how many times a keyword appears. And so to me, like I said earlier, having a Twitter account that's sort of publicly facing one players are going to search for, that's the first thing that's going to come up in any search result because it's integrated directly within Google search.
Okay, so wait, don't go too fast. Don't go too fast. So with Twitter, if I have a Twitter account, should my Twitter account be my name? I know your Twitter account is your name, and Ed's is Snow Crash 65. Yeah. So what should it be?
I would always advocate to own your name, and that's what I was kind of leading into is if people are Googling your name, like I feel bad for the other, I think there are 8 other Matt Charneys out there who are, the professional world. I feel bad for them because, they're not going to come up in Google searches, looks good, bad, or worse. If they get confused with me, that sucks for them. The one thing I would advise people to do is to, even if you're not using a network, or a platform, to go in and buy your name or
on Twitter,
a variation of it.
On Twitter, you're saying?
For instance, for $9.99 a year, I have mattcharney.com. I know that that's going to be because the first thing Google does read is the URL of the site. That's always going to be the first thing that returns. If you have a name like John Smith or whatever, what I would actually say is the most common variation is people will put that name and then they'll put in the location. So let's say I'm a John Smith who lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. I would try to register John Smith Worcester. as many times as possible. And, there are probably a bunch of them too, but that's
hang on. Matt, you're going a little too fast for our listeners. So what you're suggesting is that people should go and get the domain name of their name.
Correct. And if that's not available, then their name with the variant of their location or profession.
Okay.
So John Smith CPA,
Great.
John Smith, Worcester, Massachusetts.
So they got their domain name.
Those are the two most common variants, but either way, if people put those in, you're going to start ranking higher.
Gotcha. So they got their domain name. What would be the next thing they do should we start going on to, or is there anything else they should do about being relevant on Google, or should we now go to like Twitter, let's say? And in Twitter, you're suggesting
they're the same, as I was saying earlier, because that Twitter results show up in Google, LinkedIn results show up in Google, Facebook results show up sort of in Google. It'll say find people named, generally won't point to a specific person. But the one thing that I will say that people can do on Google, while Google Plus is not an actively developed or supported network, if you set up a Google Plus profile, which you can still do, that will also show up in any native Google search result. So what I would say is make sure that you upload a professional image to that, and also a short bio that has as many, if you're trying to get a job, professionally related keywords as you can put in there.
And that's in
as
Google.
Opposed to a vague description. If the purpose is getting a job, populate that Google Plus profile, not only with links to the sites you want people to see, so those are going to rank you higher,
hang on,
but
because you go,
with
hang on,
short biographical information.
Hang on, you're going real quick. So let's just take one thing at a time. So the first thing you're saying is you should get your URL. The next thing you're saying is you should get a Twitter account. All of these, and we'll call them just properties, should have the exact same name, right? So if I'm John Smith Worcester, that's my URL. That should be my Twitter handle. That should be everything that I create. Is that right?
That would rank you the highest in search. Yeah.
Okay. So now let me ask you a question, just me personally, because my name, Lorne Epstein, is the only Lorne Epstein, but what we've done is brand a lot of all those things as your hired radio. Is that the right thing to do, or should we go back to my name?
That is a question that depends on if you're trying to promote Lorne Epstein or if you're trying to promote your hired radio.
Great.
If you were trying to do the former, I would say that not many people are going to search for you under Get Hired Radio, but that's just about the purpose.
Right. So start branding all these things. So there's Twitter, and we know that Twitter is one of the best because it's kind of baked into Google. And then what about LinkedIn? Right? Because can I control my name on LinkedIn? Ed, do you know?
Sure. I mean, you can. It depends. You know, you have in the URL, you have a name at the end. If you were relatively early in terms of creating a LinkedIn account, you probably have a good shot. And if your name is somewhat, like unique, a Lorne Epstein or an Ed Barrientos, you probably have a shot of having just that name. Much like everything else, though, if you were a little bit later in coming to LinkedIn, you may have some other number associated, Lorne Epstein 5, or having to come up with a different type of handle for LinkedIn. So It works in the same way. Wait, can I? I want to add something to what Matt said, because I agree with him in general. But thinking of the sort of the bell curve and how human beings behave, I think on the very advanced side, I would agree 100% with Matt. And we've talked a little bit about those that are really way behind, that don't have anything.
Right.
The majority of us are kind of in that middle, part of the bell curve. And I think one of the challenges, if you're not really going to be active on Twitter, and you go out there and you create a Twitter profile, and people go and click on that Twitter profile and they see that there's no posts, or there's been one post in the last 2 years, I think that works against you.
Yeah.
Because it says you followed somebody's advice to create all these things, but
you're not doing anything.
You don't care.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, Twitter, I love Twitter. And the reason I have my name Snowcrash65 is because I was early on. Had I done it later, I probably would have changed it to my name. Now it is what it is. But not everyone enjoys Twitter or uses Twitter on a regular basis. And I do think that anything that you're doing that is not, again, coming back to the authenticity, if you're not really a Twitter user and you're not out there doing this, then again, that can work against you. If you're out there and you're doing smart things with Twitter and somebody is Googling your name and they see it and they click on it and they see all your posts, great, that works in your favor. If you're not, that can work against you.
So
just
one
as well.
easy way to leverage Twitter is to have an account and just read what other people follow people, read what they're writing, and repost it.
Yeah.
So that
that's
right there
one way,
creates a
yeah.
brand. You don't have to create your own content.
That's right.
Would you say that's true, Matt?
Yeah, and I think that to that point, you don't even actually need to read it. I'll use William Tincup as an example. Dude has like 150,000 Twitter followers, but almost all of his updates are just simply put through an RSS feed from really targeted technology and human resources sites. So there are a number of free tools out there. Again, you go on Google. I don't do this. I don't have a preference. There are a number of free tools where literally all you have to do is put in either a URL or somebody else's Twitter feed or really any publicly facing site that populates content, and every time that's updated, it will automatically tweet it.
Oh, and what
you
can
don't
people go
actually
to?
have to do anything.
What's the tool for that?
I personally have used Hootsuite for that in the past. Buffer is another one that you can use for personal for free. You can do this with Hootsuite as well. There's a number of options there, and they also let you schedule them ahead of time if you don't want to do a pure RSS. So you can just kind of do it all in one fell swoop, and the content will get out there at different times if you want to take that track.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, let's move on to what a lot of people use are the job boards. Monster, Career Builder. What do you do there? I mean, that's just your resume.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure anyone really, this is probably going to get me in trouble, but I think there's so much aggregation that's happening in the job market or in the job listing space or job board space. I'm not sure that there's really. Maybe Matt has some ideas. To me, you're talking about creating a resume. Every one of these places allows you to create a basic profile to make applying for jobs easier. But in terms of branding itself, I'm not sure there's a whole lot that you can do. I don't know, Matt. What are your thoughts? I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah. So I say this as somebody who works in corporate comms for Monster for 5 years. To be honest, if you apply for a job that's posted on a job board, you're probably not getting that job, statistically speaking. The one thing I will tell you is you should have a somewhat up-to-date resume that's in the resume repository. So essentially, you do two things with the job board if you're an employer. You post jobs, but you can also search for people with certain skill sets. I would just make sure that you have something that's got keywords, skills, and whatever other search terms you'd want to be found by sitting in that resume database. So I would not apply for a job because quite literally every employer looks for what we call, quote, passive candidates, which is to say there's always a strong preference for people who are currently working who aren't looking for a job. Don't ask me why, but that is always the case. And if you're applying for a job off a job board, you're essentially saying that you don't have a network, you don't have a ton of options, and you're just essentially going into the bucket of people who are desperate.
I'm going to actually counter what you said, Matt.
From a brand perspective, that's not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, I've been recruiting for over 20 years, and I've hired a ton of people through Monster. I would do searches, I would make phone calls, and I would hire people. And it was I haven't done hands-on recruiting in the last few years, but it's been a very good source of candidates because there are so many people there. And LinkedIn now, folks maybe don't know this, but LinkedIn has just changed.
Were any of those applicants, or were they people you found on the resume database?
Both. I've hired people who've applied to jobs through Monster, just like, through jobs I would post. But now folks who don't know about LinkedIn, they've just changed their entire search module schema. And for recruiters, LinkedIn is kind of becoming trash.
Well, one of the, if I may,
but I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
Consistency has been my bug. If I see someone's resume in a couple of different places and it's not the same thing, particularly when dates are different, that's a huge red flag. So if you're going to put your resume out, make sure it's the same one on LinkedIn, on Monster, on Career Builder.
Right. Yeah, I was going to agree with Matt. I think I agree with him wholeheartedly. There's always a bias toward looking for people that are actually working as opposed to not working, and those passives are exactly why we created Brazen, actually. We have a tool for talent engagement that's specifically aimed at trying to get people out of the woodwork And one of the biggest challenges with job boards is the fact that they offer one basic call to action. If you're on a job board, you look at a job, you see that big apply now button. Everyone, I'll say top talent hates those apply now buttons. They know that it leads to a black hole. I think everyone knows that, and therefore they're not going to move forward. They may be interested because they saw this job somewhere and they're looking at the job listing, but they're probably not going to apply for all the reasons that Matt mentioned. Yeah. What we do is we give them that alternative call to action to actually engage with us. Speak with one of our hiring managers or our recruiters or coworkers via chat. So that's I think we agree on that.
But getting 100%. Back to the branding conversation is that if some of the things that I want to just kind of summarize what we learned. One, your brand is how people see you. So it'd be good to figure out, how do people see you? How do you want to be seen? And then plan your message and have it be the same message however you want to share it. You've got your family message, you've got your LinkedIn message, and be consistent, right? So if you're using Twitter, like what we were talking about, which is a great tool, you can just repost people's stuff as long as it's consistent maybe with the work that you do or your interests. Then when I go look there as a recruiter, I'll think, well, this guy's or gal is, they're clearly interested in this stuff. They're engaged in what is cool and hip or what's relevant. Let's move on to some of the other tools. So besides LinkedIn, Google, Twitter, Monster, what other things can I use to kind of create my brand tactically?
Well, I think traditionally, and I think it still holds, the concept of networking is still critical, right? Being out there, meeting people, especially in whatever it is that you do, there are always opportunities to meet other people in your field. And they present themselves locally. Sometimes they present themselves at conferences and so forth. Being active. And look, no one likes to network, or I'll say very many people hate the networking concept. Not everyone has that personality that allows them to go up to people, total strangers, and talk to them. But that is really important. That hasn't changed. And, technologies like LinkedIn, other social media, even Brazen have tried to bring that online. But at the end of the day, physical networking still is very powerful.
Yeah, I'd rather networking be called friend making. I hate that word networking.
That's fair.
Or drinking.
Or drinking, right.
Yes.
Like being friends. How do you make friends with people?
Absolutely.
It's so, I get that. I actually enjoy making friends, but I do get to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to talk to any more people. But that is a good thing. So when you're networking or when you're meeting people, we'll call it just meeting people, what do you do to create your brand? Matt, what do you do?
Yeah. I think the biggest mistake people make is they talk about themselves, right? And so we build an affinity. People like talking about themselves. And
so if everybody just listens, then no one says anything. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was saying if you're approaching somebody at a networking event for the purpose of a job or career, if you're very blatant about that and you lead right in with the, here's what I'm about and the glad handing, which, Lorne, I know that you certainly have been subject to a lot of, you're just another person who wants something. I think that it's really important to first learn about them and then kind of use what it is they're telling you in order to craft the conversation. So, for instance, I actually met my boss at Warner Brothers at a networking event, and I just kind of asked, how did you end up in this job? And he told me that he went to UConn. And so the rest of our conversation was spent talking about college basketball. And that was a better affinity builder for a long-term relationship than, hey, we're both into talent acquisition for studios. So I would say at first ask that person what they're about and then find a point of affinity and build off of that because people want to work with people like them. It's that simple.
Yeah, that's true. As far as building your brand, being a listener is a good way to be in general. We like people who listen, right? Nobody wants to just be talked at. We want to have dialogue.
Yep. I think we've all been in those situations where you're at a bar and somebody just wants to keep talking about, something that you don't want to talk about at a bar.
Yeah.
And, you want something a little lighthearted. I like your term, friend building versus networking. If nothing turns me off more than having somebody that is obviously just networking.
Yeah.
Couldn't care less about what I'm saying, has one eye looking at who else in the room
Right.
is better to talk to. That's really obnoxious. And they actually have hurt themselves as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
And as an angel investor, I'm invited all the time to these, forums and meetings and networking events where startups are there and so forth, and that really drives me crazy. I mean, again, it's you can be too much of a professional networker,
right.
and if you are, that's a turnoff to a lot of people.
So one of the reasons I love doing this show is because I like to hear what people's stories are. I find them to be incredibly fascinating, and so for me, it's just natural to hear what people have to say, and it's like listening to a good show.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a couple of minutes left. I wanted to just kind of wrap up. Ed, do you have any parting kind of words of wisdom for anyone who's trying to figure out this brand thing?
Yeah, I think be honest in terms of what you're actually trying to do professionally, right? I mean, people do move around, but there are certain areas where you say, look, I'm looking for a job that is in the creative space. I'm a designer, I'm an advertising person, I'm a writer, whatever. You need to shine in what people are looking for in those individuals, which
right.
is creativity. Your chances of, again, adding a lot more color to your brand is high because that's what the recruiter or the employer is looking for as well. If you're in an area where, I hate to say that, accounting is dry, but if you're more specific where people are looking for specific competencies, for specific, experiences, you're going to have to provide that. You can't just replace it with color. Now, if you can sort of add that as well, that's great. But don't forget the meat. Mm-hmm. And the meat for you is going to be different in the different areas that you're working in and where you want to excel in.
That's great. I think those are good bits of wisdom. Matt, do you want to leave us with some parting wisdom?
Yeah, I think that while it's been a good conversation, the one thing about building your brand, much like Ed said about networking, if you try too hard, you're going to fail. So always remember that no matter what site you're on, no matter what job you're in, and no matter what property you're posting on, if you're not consistent, likable, and human, then this is all an exercise in futility. So just do you, and the rest falls into line.
That's great. So, Ed, how can folks find you and Brazen if they're interested in reaching out to you?
Well, Brazen is at brazen.com. I'm at ed at at brazen.com. Feel free to drop me a line. Always interested in hearing.
And I want to know, how do you start a fire with one match?
Well, first of all, that's cheating. Starting it with a match is already cheating. You have to learn how to start without a match.
Okay. So I learned that in the Boy Scouts, where you take to create the heat.
It's a lot of work, and let me tell you, be prepared to spend hours to create fire. Fire is hard.
Awesome. And Matt, how can folks reach you?
Best way to do it is Matt at recruitingdaily.com or at Matt Charney on Twitter. I'll generally respond to those, but definitely also make sure to check out recruitingdaily.com for content related to some of the things we talked about.
Awesome. Great. I want to thank my guests for sharing their wisdom on how to brand yourself. You've been listening to You're Hired. I'm your host, Lorne Epstein, here on 96.7 FM. We'll see you next week at 10 a.m. on Mondays.